Hey guys, tonight's story begins not with a blueprint or a dream, but with vengeance dressed in stone. Before we step into the grandeur of arches and echoing chambers, let's sit back, breathe, and listen to the faint rumble of ancient ambition beneath the streets of Rome. To understand the Colosseum, we don't need engineering manuals or marble samples. We need to understand Roman pride, not the lofty kind. Think pettiness, bruised egos, and the desperate need to erase a predecessor's shadow. That's the true mortar holding those stones together. Rome, in the wake of Nero, was a city disoriented by excess. Nero, more infamous than beloved, had decided the city's greatest flaw was its lack of a private aquatic playground. While fires scarred the city and citizens cried for aid, Nero bulldozed neighborhoods, seized land, and dug out a personal lake upon which he could float his golden whims. It wasn't a garden. It was an emperor's fantasy carved into the urban core, surrounded by opulence that mocked the struggle of everyday Romans. Then came Vespasian, a man cut from coarser cloth, practical and politically sharp. He didn't just want to rebuild Rome, he wanted to cleanse it. His solution? Bury Nero's narcissism, literally. Fill in the lake, erase the symbol of indulgence, and in its place, raise something spectacular. Not a temple, not a palace. A spectacle. A colossal theater for death, sport, and pageantry. The message was clear. The empire wasn't about private luxury anymore. It was about public control. So they built the Colosseum not to celebrate the gods, but to erase the memory of a man. This wasn't urban development. It was a statement, shouted in travertine and iron. Nero is forgotten. Rome remembers its people. And the people. They loved it. There's nothing like free shows and free food to make one forget an economic collapse. Bread and blood, an old Roman recipe for forgiveness. The Colosseum offered both. While modern politics might depend on speeches and policies, Vespasian knew the true art of governance was distraction at scale. The sheer volume of labor required was mind-numbing. Tens of thousands of workers, some skilled artisans, many enslaved, hauled stone, carved channels, and wrestled the stubborn land into submission. They drained the remnants of Nero's indulgence and laid down a new foundation, one meant not to reflect a single man's vanity, but the enduring dominance of an empire. And yet, even that's not quite true. Because while Vespasian claimed to act for the people, there's a kind of ego that builds a stadium that holds 50,000 souls just to watch death disguised as entertainment. The Colosseum wasn't humble. It didn't whisper, it roared. From its first sketches, it was meant to overshadow the past and intimidate the present. Not just a stage, but a monument to imperial ambition. Egypt's pyramids reached for the heavens in silence. Greek theaters sang to muses and myths. But Rome? Rome built an arena that laughed at subtlety and wrestled lions before lunch. As the stones rose, so did a new identity for the empire. One that didn't apologize for violence but choreographed it. One that didn't wait for divine approval but demanded public awe. In place of Nero's vanity pool, a political machine was born. One that weaponized entertainment to keep the crowd fed and the murmurs of discontent drowned in cheers. The Colosseum was Rome's reset button, a grand ellipse of engineered memory loss. And it worked. The city forgot Nero. They remembered the games, not through mercy, through marvel. To say the Colosseum was big is like saying the sun's a little warm. It wasn't built to be admired. It was built to dominate. Physically, psychologically, politically. Every block, every arch, every echoing tunnel carried a message. Rome does not just rule, it overwhelms. 50,000 spectators? That was the goal. In a world without power, tools, cranes, or concrete mixers, A stadium capable of swallowing a small city and spitting it back out, entertained, horrified, and deeply loyal. That was the plan. And Rome. Rome executed it with breathtaking speed and precision. Construction began in 70 CE. By 80 CE, crowds were already spilling into its seats, wine in hand, ready to witness blood and glory. While modern construction projects choke on permits and environmental reviews, Rome simply shrugged. Was the ground stable? Probably not. It had been a lake. Did that matter? Not in the least. They drained it, packed it, and started stacking stone. Rome didn't ask permission. It imposed intention. From the outside, the Colosseum looks like a stone wedding cake baked by someone with control issues. 4 towering stories, layers of arches stacked neatly in rows, columns that refuse to follow one style, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, all jammed together in a defiant architectural mixtape. Rome couldn't pick a theme, so it chose all of them and made it work. But the beauty wasn't just skin deep. Those arches, they weren't for show. They were the bones of the beast. Load-bearing, shock-absorbing, crowd-managing marvels of engineering. Each one supported its neighbors, redistributing weight and resisting earthquakes with an elegance that modern buildings still envy. Rome didn't just stack stone, it composed it. And then there were the vomitoria. Don't let the name fool you. These weren't rooms for purging after too much wine and roast boar. Vomitoria were exit tunnels, designed to eject tens of thousands of people from the arena in minutes. A logistical miracle in a toga. The Colosseum could clear its seats faster than most modern stadiums. No software, no digital signs. Just human flow, perfectly channeled through masonry. Inside, the structure unfolded like an elaborate puzzle. Arches stacked on arches, corridors wrapped in vaults, every path, every stair, every ramp fed into a calculated design. The audience moved not where they wanted, but where Rome allowed. It was architectural puppeteering. And it worked. Social order was baked into the seating. Senators closest to the action, noblemen just above, merchants and commoners further back, and at the very top, the invisible. Slaves, foreigners, and anyone deemed disposable. Vertical segregation, built in stone. Everyone knew their place, and the building made sure they stayed in it. The real brilliance, the exits. With carefully angled corridors and staggered tunnels, Rome created a design so efficient that 50,000 people could leave the Colosseum in under 10 minutes. No pushing, no panic, just physics and planning. Modern architects study those blueprints today with a mix of awe and shame. The Colosseum wasn't just built for size, it was built for movement. Rome understood that managing a crowd was as much about strategy as it was about spectacle, and in that swirling dance of sandals and togas, the empire flexed its genius. So as tourists today shuffle through its remains, squinting at plaques and taking selfies, they stand inside a machine built not just to hold a crowd, but to shape it, to tame it, to turn 50,000 individuals into one breathing, cheering, controlled organism. And that, more than the marble or mortar, is what made the Colosseum indestructible. It wasn't just a structure, it was an ideology made visible. Rome didn't just build for the eye, it built for power. Above, the Colosseum dazzled. Beneath, it schemed. What most spectators never saw, what perhaps they never even considered, was the secret world that churned just below the sand. Under their feet, hidden by the wooden floor and the roar of 50,000 screaming citizens, lay a labyrinth so complex, so alive, that it rivaled the arena itself in brilliance and brutality. This was the Hippodrome. Not a basement, not a dungeon, a system, a machine, a living organism pulsing beneath Rome's grandest theater. The Romans weren't content with having fighters walk into the ring. No, They wanted drama, they wanted illusion, they wanted lions to appear as if conjured by the gods and gladiators to rise from darkness into the sun like heroes born from chaos. So they built an underground fortress of wood, rope, iron, and muscle, a place where the show was shaped, rigged, and launched. Picture it, 2 levels deep, sprawling across the full length and width of the arena. Tunnels ran like arteries. Cages lined the walls. Storage chambers held props, weapons, and sometimes whole stage sets. The air was thick with sweat, smoke, and the restless growls of animals waiting to be released. This was where enslaved workers toiled in darkness, unseen by the crowd, orchestrating every beat of the spectacle above. And at the center of it all, elevators. Yes, elevators. Not powered by hydraulics, not driven by steam, but raised by ropes, counterweights, and sheer human strength. These wooden platforms could lift entire cages, miniature forests, or terrified gladiators directly through trap doors in the arena floor. The effect was magic. One moment, the stage was empty. The next, a snarling leopard or armored warrior appeared as if summoned by divine will. But down below, there was no magic, only noise, tension, and sweat-soaked labor. Each elevator shaft required 8 to 12 men to operate, turning giant wooden wheels that wound thick ropes with the precision of a deadly dance. A single misstep, one tired hand, one frayed line, and the illusion above would shatter. Platforms could tilt, cages could crash. Timing was everything, because in Rome, drama wasn't optional, it was expected. Gladiators sometimes stood in pitch blackness, waiting on a creaking platform, listening to the sounds of ropes tightening, pulleys groaning, and animals snarling in the distance. Then, in an instant, the trapdoor above split open, and sunlight exploded around them, and there they stood, sword in hand, knees trembling, eyes adjusting, surrounded by tens of thousands of Romans screaming for violence. It wasn't just fighters. The Romans lifted trees, fake rocks, and entire scenes from myths. The arena floor was a shapeshifter. In the morning, a bare desert. By noon, a forest. By evening, a battlefield strewn with props and bodies. The Hypogeum was the engine room of this transformation. And it wasn't quiet. Below the sand, chaos ruled. Workers shouted over each other, animals clawed their cages, gears slammed into place. It was loud, it was hot, and it was dangerous. One wrong move and you weren't an operator anymore, you were a casualty. Yet somehow it worked. The Romans weren't just engineers, they were stage managers with a bloodlust. The Hypogeum turned spectacle into machinery, and machinery into power. What the crowd saw was a lion appearing from nowhere. What they didn't see was the army of men below, cranking, sweating, praying. Nothing snapped. Every roar above had an echo below. Every entrance, every reveal, every dramatic moment had been planned and rehearsed, not for safety, but for maximum awe. And when it worked, when the timing was perfect and the trap door opened with theatrical precision, the crowd didn't cheer for the engineering. They cheered for the empire, because beneath the violence, beneath the chaos, the Colosseum was making a promise that Rome could control anything, even the floor itself. Just when you think the Romans had exhausted their appetite for spectacle, they went ahead and flooded the Colosseum. On purpose. This wasn't a plumbing mishap or a misread weather scroll. It was an intentional decision made by people who looked at the world's grandest amphitheater and thought, what this really needs is boats. The spectacle was called a naumachia, a staged sea battle meant to reenact famous naval victories or, more often, provide a watery death sentence for prisoners of war. Imagine this. The sun rising over Rome, thousands of citizens filing into the stone arena expecting swords and spears, only to find the floor gleaming with water, shimmering like a lake summoned from nowhere. To make that happen, the Romans redirected aqueducts, ran pipes underground, and designed a drainage system that could fill and empty the arena with astonishing speed. No pumps, no electric valves. Just gravity, clever channeling, and pure imperial audacity. In the blink of an afternoon, the flat battlefield of sand became a miniature ocean. Specially constructed ships, flat-bottomed, maneuverable, were lowered into the water. Scenery floated. Painted islands bobbed in the waves, and from the stands, spectators watched as actors, convicts, and condemned soldiers climbed into boats to either perform or die. It was absurd. It was excessive. It was Rome. The combatants weren't trained naval officers. They were expendables, sent out in rickety vessels to simulate history while fighting for their lives. Audiences cheered as tiny galleys crashed into each other, men fell into the water, and imitation warfare unfolded below. There was no real victory, only performance, only blood and applause. From above, it looked like a living painting, blue water under golden sunlight, sails unfurling, wooden hulls splintering. From within, it was chaos. Screams, splashes, the weight of armor dragging men under. No one volunteered for a naumachia. You didn't get a hero's welcome after surviving one. You were lucky if you weren't devoured by the props. Because the water, it wasn't friendly. It seeped into the wooden flooring. It rotted beams. It warped the substructure. And it turned the hypogeum below into a humid, moldy nightmare. Maintenance crews dreaded these events. Architects winced. Even the animals in the cages below probably wondered what genius decided to flood their ceiling. Eventually, Rome decided that staging naval battles inside a stadium built for sand and blood was perhaps a logistical nightmare. The practice faded, quietly, like a half-remembered fever dream. But for a while, long enough to be remembered, the Colosseum became a sea. A sea contained inside stone. That's what set Rome apart, not just their willingness to go big, but their refusal to acknowledge limits. They didn't ask whether they should. They simply asked, what if? And when the answer was, we flood it and have boats crash into each other, nobody blinked. They just started rerouting aqueducts. The Colosseum was many things, a stage, a tomb, a trap. But for a few surreal afternoons, it was also a theater of water. A floating battlefield built atop buried rage, where even the sea could be summoned, controlled, and weaponized. Because Rome wasn't just showing power, it was performing it. Modern concrete crumbles, Roman concrete endures. That alone should make you suspicious. Look at any modern parking garage, and you'll find cracks where none should be. Chips flaking from surfaces poured less than a decade ago. A squirrel sneezes and your balcony gives up. But the Colosseum? It's been through earthquakes, invasions, fire, tourists, and the Middle Ages, and still, it stands. Bruised, yes, but unbroken. The reason? A recipe lost to time, and a mindset that didn't believe in shortcuts. The Romans didn't mix concrete. They forged it, with volcanic ash from the Bay of Naples, quicklime, seawater, and a stubborn refusal to die. When they poured this blend into wooden molds, they weren't just building. They were casting a structure designed to evolve. Because Roman concrete didn't set like ours. It aged like wine and became stronger with time. Where modern cement stiffens and shatters under stress, Roman concrete adapts. It grows crystals inside itself. Microscopic, interlocking, self-healing structures that bond tighter as the years pass. It's not just durable, it's intelligent. Imagine the hubris of a civilization that decided to mix the Earth's fire, volcanic ash, with the ocean, seawater, and trap it inside stone. Then imagine it working. At the foundation of the Colosseum lies a concrete ring, 12 meters deep, hugging the earth like a stone leviathan. It anchors the entire arena, absorbing earthquakes the way a tree flexes in wind. Where modern engineers draft thick reports about soil stress and seismic zones, the Romans simply asked, "Is it wet? Yes? Then pour something stronger." And they did. They layered that foundation with blocks of limestone and bound it all together with iron clamps. These weren't decorative. These were the metal tendons of a giant skeletal frame, holding the body of the Colosseum together against every natural disaster it would ever face. But Rome didn't stop with raw strength. The structure was smart. The concrete wasn't poured as one solid blob. It was stratified, each layer tuned for different stress levels and movement. Dense material at the bottom, more flexible mixes above. It was, in essence, the first anti-earthquake cake. When tremors rolled through the ground, the Colosseum didn't resist. It absorbed, it flexed, it bent and swayed slightly, like a sleeping dragon shifting in its bed. Cracks appeared, yes, but collapse? Never. The stress dispersed across the arches and into the vaults, vanishing through the bones of the building. And that's the thing, the Romans weren't just builders. They were survivors. They expected nature to attack them, so they built like it would. The concrete wasn't just stone, it was insurance. It was prophecy. A statement in hardened ash that said, even if we fall, this will remain. And it did. Long after the emperors crumbled, long after the empire fractured, long after the marble was stripped and the iron looted, the concrete stayed, silent, patient, strong. Even now, scientists peer at it like it's an ancient spell. They drill into it, scratch its surface, run simulations to try and replicate it. They whisper to it, almost reverently, "How are you still here?" And if the Colosseum could answer, it might say, "Because I wasn't built for now. I was built for always." To the Romans, the straight line was useful, but the arch, that was sacred. It wasn't just an architectural flourish. It was their answer to gravity, to earthquakes, to the passage of time. It was how they built their empire. Not just literally, but ideologically. Because when Rome curved a line, it made a statement. We understand the forces of the world, and we will bend them to our will. The Colosseum is made of arches. You don't even have to count. Just look, they're everywhere. 240 on the outer shell alone. Perfectly spaced, perfectly proportioned, perfectly smug. But don't be fooled. These weren't just entryways. They were the skeleton. The real reason the Colosseum hasn't collapsed in 2,000 years isn't magic concrete or superstition. It's the arch. Over and over again. Stacked like ribs, linked like chainmail, engineered like a battlefield strategy. Arches work by pushing weight to the sides, not down. Think of it as architectural judo. Gravity tries to crush a structure. The arch says, "No, you're going over there." Each one transfers its load to the next in a perfect loop of shared pressure. One arch doesn't hold the weight. All of them do. It's teamwork made of limestone. In the Colosseum, these arches weren't just stacked. They were layered. Multiple stories high, each level more intricate than the last. Doric columns on the bottom, sturdy, plain, unyielding. Ionic above that, slimmer, more decorative. Then Corinthian at the top. Fancy, almost theatrical. Rome didn't just build functionally, it built symbolically. Strength on the bottom, beauty at the top, because even stone needed to look good. And inside, those arches multiplied. Corridors, tunnels, stairwells, vaults. It was a honeycomb of movement, a maze of load-bearing grace. Earthquakes shook it countless times, and still it stood, because the force didn't shatter it, it flowed through it. Imagine walking beneath one of those arches during a tremor. You'd feel the ground roll, the dust fall, the building moan, but you wouldn't be crushed, because the stress would slide away, passing from stone to stone like a whisper down a line. Rome built its stadium like a living organism, and its bones were always prepared to flex. Even the aesthetics had function. The repetition of arches wasn't just pleasing to the eye, it helped balance forces across the structure. It created rhythm, stability, a kind of visual equilibrium that made the entire building feel like it belonged to the earth. And yet, the real genius wasn't just in the form, it was in the philosophy. Modern architecture often fights nature. Rome worked with it. They didn't ask the arch to do more than it could. They simply arranged enough of them to share the burden. That's why the Colosseum didn't collapse like so many other monuments. It didn't resist stress. It absorbed it and passed it along until no one piece had to carry too much. It's the exact opposite of how most human systems work. In politics, in business, in life, we overload the strongest until they break. The Romans looked at a curve of stone and said, "No, we all carry this, together." That's why their buildings lasted. Not because they were hard, but because they were flexible. Arches don't fight force, they redirect it. In the Colosseum, this principle became physical truth. Every arch is a negotiation, every vault is a compromise, every level is a treaty of pressure between stones that agree not to fall. And in that agreement, Rome built eternity. Rome didn't just know how to build buildings, it knew how to build behavior. Inside the Colosseum, the real victory wasn't the gladiator who survived the lion. It was the empire that could manage 50,000 impatient, sweaty Romans and make them sit, cheer, eat, and leave exactly when and how they were supposed to. This wasn't architecture. It was control. From the moment a citizen approached the arena, their experience had been mapped. 80 arched entrances ringed the base, each one numbered and assigned to a specific seating section. Your ticket? Yes, ancient Rome had tickets, told you exactly where to enter and where to sit. And if you didn't follow that direction, you'd find yourself in the wrong corridor, surrounded by people who were more than happy to push you back into line. Inside, the structure unraveled like a coiled labyrinth. Arched hallways, stairwells, and vaulted passages guided every footstep. Wealthy patrons had direct, elegant paths to prime seats, wide, gently sloping ramps that whisked them past the chaos. The poor? They climbed steep staircases up into the clouds, packed into the upper tiers where they could barely see the sand, but had a clear view of imperial order in action. This vertical arrangement wasn't accidental. Rome liked its class system visible. From the arena floor, you could look up and see society stacked like a cake. Senators and nobility lounged in marble seats just meters from the action. Merchants and craftsmen formed a noisy middle ring, and at the very top, peasants, slaves, foreigners, every social rank encased in stone. And yet, everyone behaved. Why? Because the building didn't allow for chaos. Its passageways flowed like rivers. Arches led into tunnels. Tunnels split into ramps. Ramps led to seats. At no point did you have a choice about where to go. You followed the current, whether you knew it or not. Even the exits were engineered for speed. The vomitoria, those infamous spit-you-out tunnels, could clear the arena in under 10 minutes. That's 50,000 people moving through stone hallways with no signage, no ushers, no voice over loudspeakers. Just design. Modern stadiums struggle to achieve the same result with floor plans, apps, and emergency drills. Rome did it with gravity and geometry. And it wasn't just about efficiency, it was about trust. When 50,000 people know they can get in and out quickly, they show up, they participate, they cheer. The system creates confidence, the spectacle becomes routine, and the empire cements its control. This was crowd psychology sculpted in limestone. Rome didn't need to tell you where to go. The building did, and you obeyed. Because in the Colosseum, the empire didn't just entertain you. It surrounded you, it moved you, it shaped your experience from the first step to the final cheer. And when you left, sweaty and hoarse, convinced you'd just watched something divine, It wasn't just the games that impressed you. It was Rome. In most buildings, elevators are an afterthought, a convenience, not a spectacle. But in the Colosseum, elevators were the show before the show. Imagine a lion pacing restlessly in a wooden cage. Beneath it, a dozen men are cranking a system of pulleys and ropes, muscles straining, ropes groaning. A trapdoor above opens with a sharp clap, and suddenly that lion is in the sun, blinking, baring teeth, and staring down a gladiator who probably wishes he had stayed in bed. This wasn't a rare trick. It was routine. Dozens of vertical shafts sat below the arena floor, each fitted with a platform connected to an intricate web of counterweights and capstans. The design was medieval madness, except it wasn't medieval. It was first-century genius, and it worked. Each elevator was powered not by steam nor springs, but by muscle, specifically enslaved workers turning massive wheels like human hamsters. 8 to 12 men were required for each lift, and everything had to move in sync. A single slip, a moment's fatigue, and the platform might lurch sideways, tossing its cargo or snapping the ropes. A snarling predator becomes a flying disaster. These platforms didn't just carry animals, they carried props, scenery, sometimes entire clusters of trees or fake hills. One moment, the floor was flat. The next, it was a forest, or a ruined temple, or a mythological underworld where a condemned man was about to reenact a hero's death, and then actually die. And yes, people rode them too. Gladiators would often be lifted into battle from below, standing in darkness until the trap door snapped open and daylight blasted them in the face. They'd rise into the roar of the crowd, 50,000 throats all screaming for spectacle. That wasn't an entrance. That was a rebirth into violence. This wasn't automation, it was orchestration. Each reveal was timed like a symphony. The lift, the trap door, the stagehands, the noise, all synchronized by sheer will and sweat. And the risks? Constant. A missed cue could bring disaster. A delayed lift might trap an animal below or send a fighter into the arena too early or too late. The Romans weren't known for forgiving technical difficulties. If a lion failed to appear on time, someone would be punished. If a hero's death scene ended with him stuck halfway through the floor, it wasn't just embarrassing. It was sacrilege. Yet they did it, over and over, dozens of platforms rising and falling throughout a single day of games, each one a miniature miracle of timing and terror. Not once a year, not for special occasions, but as part of the regular programming. And somehow this system worked better than most modern stage tech. That's the wildest part. Today's theaters, with their computer-controlled hydraulic lifts, would struggle to match the sheer mechanical reliability of Rome's wooden, rope-driven death elevators. They weren't perfect, but they were repeatable, durable, dramatic. Every rising platform was a promise that no matter what you expected, the Colosseum would surprise you, a tiger from the shadows, a man from the myth, a forest from the floor. Because in Rome, the ground itself performed. To call the Colosseum a stadium is to miss the point entirely. It was never just a place to sit and watch. It was a shape-shifting illusion factory, half butcher shop, half Broadway stage, and all imperial flex. Rome didn't stop at fights. That was too simple, too static. The audience wanted worlds. The empire delivered. Beneath the arena, inside the hypogeum's tangled heart, teams of sleep-deprived engineers, carpenters, and animal wranglers built the world's first backstage, complete with props, scenery, and the occasional live ostrich. Rome didn't wait for magic. It built it from scratch, out of timber, paint, and raw nerve. One moment, the floor was bare sand. The next, it bloomed into a woodland. Trees, some fake, some stolen from real gardens, rose on platforms. Painted boulders emerged. Even miniature hills and huts creaked into view, transforming the Colosseum into a mythic landscape fit for a legend. And then the actors arrived, except they weren't actors. They were convicts, prisoners of war, or anyone Rome wanted to make an example of. Today we'd call it immersive theater. In Rome it was execution with set design. A condemned man might be dressed as Orpheus or Hercules. He'd be raised into a faux forest, surrounded by trees and painted sky panels, a harp in his hands, maybe a crown on his head, and then a lion, not symbolic, a real one. Teeth, fur, hunger. The story ends, as expected, not with applause, but silence. This wasn't entertainment, it was control through narrative. Rome turned mythology into punishment, and they staged it with the obsessive detail of a director trying to impress the gods. The elevator systems used for scenery were the same that lifted animals and men. One lift might carry a gladiator in full armor. The next, a cottage made of painted wood and fabric, designed to collapse dramatically at the right moment. Timing was everything. A trap door opened a second too soon, and your epic reveal became a comedy. Yet the workers below pulled it off. Night after night, game after game. The props weren't just background. They were characters. A tree might conceal a leopard. A painted rock might serve as a perch for archers. One lift might bring up a grove. The next, a cage. And behind it all, dozens of workers cranking, sliding, adjusting with no applause, no recognition, just the constant threat of failure, because failure didn't mean a bad review. It meant death, and not for the performers. Still, the show went on, and what a show it was. Imagine sitting in the stands, watching the sand shift and split as trees grow from the floor, as water flows in or entire sets rise like dreams. The blood is real, yes, but so is the illusion. The Colosseum didn't just show violence, it dressed it in narrative, it gave it a stage. Because Rome knew something modern media often forgets. Spectacle is power. The more unbelievable the show, the more deeply people believe in the hand behind it. So the empire spent fortunes building forests from planks and legends from screams. And beneath it all, workers hauled scenery through tunnels while lions growled behind them. And above? The crowd roared, half aware they were watching a lie wrapped in truth. But that was Rome's gift, to make you believe both. The Colosseum wasn't just a factory of death and myth. It was, somehow, also a five-star experience. For some. While people were getting torn apart in the arena below, the spectators above were lounging, chatting, snacking, and soaking in a level of comfort that modern stadiums still struggle to deliver. Rome, as always, built for power, but it also built for presence. And that meant controlling what no other civilization had ever attempted, the environment. Let's start with the sun. You might think watching a 9-hour spectacle under the Mediterranean sun would feel like slow cooking in a stone skillet. And you'd be right, unless you were under the velarium. The velarium was a massive, retractable canvas awning that stretched across the top of the Colosseum like the wings of some giant, benevolent beast. Made of woven linen or sailcloth, dyed deep red or saffron, it shaded the crowd from the worst of the sun's fury. Not all of them, of course, just the upper tiers, where the direct heat hit hardest. And who controlled this heavenly fabric? The sailors of the Roman Navy. That's right. Men trained to maneuver sails on open sea were deployed to the Colosseum's roof to rig and manipulate this massive canopy. It took hundreds of them, stationed around the perimeter, hauling ropes and tying knots with nautical precision to raise and lower the velarium in rhythm with the day. It wasn't just for shade. It filtered light too, casting the arena in dramatic golden hues. Shadows danced on the sand. Light cut through at angles designed to heighten drama. A tiger emerging from darkness wasn't just scary, it was cinematic. Rome invented the vibe. Then came the air, hot, stale, reeking of sweat, blood, and fear. Not quite. The Colosseum breathed. Its design encouraged airflow. The open arches, layered seating, and high walls created a natural ventilation system. Hot air rose. Cool breezes swept through the corridors. It wasn't exactly air conditioning, but it was architectural respiration. The crowd didn't choke in heat. It inhaled Rome's brilliance. And finally, the sound. The acoustics of the Colosseum were not a happy accident. The curved structure, rising rows of stone, and the central oval arena created a natural amphitheater. Voices carried, roars echoed. A gladiator's scream could reach the farthest seat without amplification. A cheer from the top row could roll down like a wave. Everything was tuned for maximum drama. When a blade struck armor, you heard it. When the emperor stood to signal mercy or death, the silence was deafening, because the crowd knew they would hear the verdict with perfect clarity. Even the arena floor, covered in wood and sand, was part of the acoustic plan. The sand absorbed sound and blood. The wood beneath it creaked just enough to amplify the steps of fighters or the shuffle of animals. It was sound design by empire, and for the rich, it got even better. The lower sections had cushions, private boxes, the best views. Some sections even had misting systems. Attendants would sprinkle rose water or cold wine into the air. Yes, while men bled below, the elite sipped and sighed under perfumed clouds. That was Rome. Brutality in the ring. Luxury in the stands, a civilization that conquered nature, not just with roads and legions, but with linen sails, clever vents, and an uncanny understanding of how air, light, and sound shape human experience. The Colosseum wasn't just a building, it was an ecosystem. A controlled climate, a performance of power in every breeze, every shadow, every echo. Rome didn't just want to impress you, it wanted you comfortable, awestruck, and completely under control. They weren't soldiers, they weren't slaves, not entirely. And they weren't volunteers either, not really. They were gladiators, and in the Colosseum, they lived and died not as people, but as performances. Rome took human beings and forged them into living myth, just long enough to destroy them in public. A gladiator could be many things: a captured soldier from Gaul, a disgraced Roman citizen, a criminal, a debt-ridden fool who signed up for a chance at glory or survival. Regardless of origin, once inside the training schools, they were property of the empire. Branded, beaten, renamed. Their old life erased. Their new one. Combat choreography at the edge of death. They lived in ludus, gladiator barracks, guarded not to keep intruders out, but to keep fighters in. Life there was brutal and disciplined. Daily training with wooden weapons, endless drills, punishing diets, instructors who taught not just how to fight, but how to lose with flair, bleed dramatically, die well. This was Rome's entertainment industry, and like all entertainment industries, it knew how to create stars. Some gladiators rose above the rest. Men like Spiculus, a favorite of Emperor Nero, or Flamma, who was awarded the rudis, a wooden sword signifying freedom 4 times, and rejected it every time. Why? Because in the arena, he wasn't a slave, he was a god. For the crowd, these men were heroes. They had posters, merch, groupies. Women wrote love notes to them. Even noble women swooned over the most famous fighters, sometimes sending them blood-soaked garments as tokens of affection. Gladiators were sex symbols, rebels, celebrities, and property. They were also divided by type, like classes in a video game. Each one had a style, a weapon set, a silhouette meant to stand out in the arena. There was the Mimeo, big and slow, with a gladius and a fish-shaped helmet. The Retiarius, fast and flashy, armed with a net and trident, basically a fisherman with a death wish. The Secutor, the Chaser, the Democharis, wielding 2 swords. It was a deadly ballet, and Rome made sure the matchups were dramatic. Every pairing was a calculated contrast, big versus agile, armored versus exposed, brute versus tactician. The arena wasn't about fairness, it was about theater. A Retiarius dodging a Murmillo wasn't just survival, it was a story being written in sweat and blood. And when the final blow came, the gladiator would fall. Or kneel and look up to the emperor. Thumbs up or thumbs down? The decision wasn't always literal. Roman gestures were more nuanced, but the power was real. One twitch of the emperor's wrist could spare a life or end it. Sometimes the crowd weighed in. Sometimes the fighter's bravery swayed the decision. Sometimes politics decided everything. If you were spared, you lived to fight another day. If not, you died as a legend. Maybe. Because not all gladiators died. Most didn't, at least not immediately. They were expensive to train, and Rome knew the value of good entertainment. A match didn't always end in death, it ended in dominance, submission, or audience ecstasy. But death loomed, always. Some gladiators fought their way to freedom. If you survived enough matches, impressed enough senators, maybe, just maybe, you'd earn the rudies and walk away. Not as a slave, not as a corpse, but as a symbol. Still, most never made it that far. Their names were forgotten, their blood dried into the sand, their stories buried under cheers. And that was Rome's ultimate magic trick, taking men, giving them the illusion of glory, and grinding them into myth. Because in the Colosseum, you weren't just fighting a man, you were fighting the empire's hunger, and Rome always won. It wasn't just the architecture, or the animals, or the gladiators. The real genius of the Colosseum was its audience. Because Rome understood something most empires forget. You don't rule by force alone. You rule by distraction, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. That was the formula. Feed the people, entertain them, and they won't ask questions. Don't give them freedom, give them spectacle, and nothing in the Roman world delivered spectacle like the Colosseum. On game day, the streets pulsed, vendors barked, crowds surged, entire families packed baskets and made their way toward the massive arena of stone, roaring with anticipation. Admission. Free. Always. The emperors paid for it, lavishly. Because they weren't buying entertainment, they were buying loyalty. Each event was an offering, a sacrifice made not to the gods, but to the Roman citizen. You may be poor, the Colosseum whispered, but here you are fed, you are amused, you are Roman. And that mattered, because in Rome the state didn't just want obedience, it wanted your attention. So it gave you everything. Exotic animals dragged in from across the empire, tigers from India, crocodiles from the Nile, giraffes, elephants, bears. Creatures many spectators had never even heard of before appearing in the sand, snarling, charging, dying. Public executions dressed up as myth. Criminals torn apart in scripted reenactments of ancient stories. A man playing Icarus would be hoisted high into the air, then dropped to his death with theatrical flair. The message was clear. Rome punishes, and it performs. Mock naval battles, before they stopped flooding the arena. Gladiatorial duels, staged and savage. Chariot races around the edges. The Colosseum didn't host events, it hosted eras. Each day was a curated symphony of chaos. Morning, animal hunts. Midday, executions. Afternoon, gladiators. Evening, adoration or silence. And all of it was aimed directly at the crowd. Because the crowd mattered. It decided a gladiator's fate. It shaped the tone of the games. It reflected the emperor's popularity. A cheering crowd was the empire's heartbeat. A silent crowd, a threat. So Rome fed it, not just with games, but with actual food. Loaves of bread hurled from the stands, free grain passed out in the streets, wine, oil, festivals, holidays. More holidays. At its peak, a third of the Roman calendar was public festival. That wasn't generosity, that was strategy. Because if you were full, if you were cheering, if you were dazzled by flaming lions and collapsing sets, you weren't revolting, you weren't plotting, you weren't thinking about the taxes or the corruption or the wars. You were watching, and Rome was watching you. The Colosseum was never just about blood. It was about attention economy, ancient addition, a platform where the state could showcase its power, distract from its failings, and reinforce its narrative. Every spectacle was propaganda in motion. Every cheer was compliance. And the people loved it. They lined up for it. They begged for it, even as they watched men die. Because the Colosseum didn't just give them what they wanted. It taught them what to want. There was no grand finale, no final battle, no flaming collapse as the crowd screamed one last time. The Colosseum didn't die. It simply lingered. The game stopped sometime in the 5th century, though no one recorded the moment. No herald declared the end. No crowd mourned the silence. One day, the animals simply didn't arrive. The lifts no longer groaned to life beneath the floor. The sand remained clean, not out of reverence, but neglect. Rome was changing, shrinking, fracturing. The empire that had once stretched across continents was now bleeding at the edges, invaded, betrayed, abandoned by the very system it had built. Without emperors to sponsor games, without armies to bring back slaves, beasts, and treasure, the Colosseum had no purpose. It had been a machine that ran on blood and gold, and both had run out. But the stone remained. At first, the people came back, not as spectators, but as survivors. The poor, the displaced, the forgotten moved in. The arches that once framed senators and generals now sheltered goats. Craftsmen built huts between the pillars. Thieves used the underground passages to escape the law. The Colosseum became a village, a refuge, a skeleton wearing the clothes of the living. And then came the scavengers. Rome, crumbling and desperate, began to eat its own history. Marble seats were pried out and hauled off to build cathedrals and mansions. Iron clamps were dug from the walls, leaving scars where stone once held firm. Columns were toppled. Statues disappeared. The bones of the Colosseum became the bones of a city that could no longer afford to remember its glory. Earthquakes came, merciless and slow. The worst, in 1349, split the south side wide open, shearing away the elegant arcades like flesh from bone. And still, the ruin did not fall. It simply leaned into time, defiant and broken. For centuries, no one thought of it as sacred. It was just useful. A place to dig for materials, to squat, to forget. Until one day, someone looked at it differently. The church, perhaps hoping to rewrite the past, claimed it had been the site of Christian martyrdom. No evidence existed, but stories are stronger than facts. A cross was raised. Pilgrims came, not to cheer, but to weep. The blood of gladiators was replaced by the imagined blood of saints. And just like that, the Colosseum changed shape again. Not physically, but spiritually. It had been a stage for death. Now it was a monument to it. Artists arrived next. Painters, poets, dreamers. They saw in the cracked stone something Rome itself had forgotten. A ghost worth remembering. The arches became metaphors. The silence became holy. Where once there had been lions, now there was longing. The Romantic poets wrote of the Colosseum as a wound that refused to close. Byron wandered its corridors and declared it sublime. Shelley called it a temple of forgotten power. Tourists followed, cameras came, graffiti was carved, and through it all the Colosseum endured. Not because it was the strongest building, it wasn't. Not because it was the most beautiful, others outshone it. It endured because it was the most seen, because somehow, even in ruin, it remained alive in the imagination of the world. Today, the Colosseum is a paradox. It is empty, yet crowded, silent, yet loud, with the footsteps of millions, broken, yet whole in its symbolism. No emperor walks its halls, no beast waits beneath the floor, and yet the structure still whispers, still breathes. It doesn't need gladiators anymore. Now we are the spectacle, wandering through what was, trying to understand what it meant. The Colosseum is no longer Rome's instrument of power. It is Rome's memory. Stone, not shouting. Arches, not empire. Ruins, not rule. It has outlasted every ruler who once claimed it, every citizen who once cheered within it, every enemy who tried to erase it. And that, perhaps, is its final trick. Not survival, but transformation. Because in the end, the Colosseum wasn't built to last forever. It just did. The Colosseum no longer belongs to emperors, nor to Rome. It belongs to all of us. Not because we fight there, or worship there, or cheer from its stands, but because we remember it, because even in ruin, it refuses to be forgotten. It lives on in 1,000 images, a ring of arches glowing gold at twilight, a tourist squinting up at its worn facade, a silent silhouette on a candlelit postcard. It lives in film, in fantasy, in rebellion and reverence. It has become everything and nothing, a skeleton of the past, and yet the heartbeat of history. It does not roar anymore, and yet the silence it holds might be even louder. When Rome fell, the Colosseum should have fallen with it. The fact that it didn't, that it still stands, scarred and half-buried in time, is not a fluke. It is a message about the persistence of symbols. The Colosseum was once powered by slaves, animals, soldiers, and spectacle. Now it is powered by memory. Tourists shuffle through its corridors, unaware that their footsteps mirror those of spectators from 2,000 years ago. They do not see blood on the sand. They see wonder. They photograph echoes. And yet, beneath every stone, something lingers, not ghosts, not curses, but something more haunting, the knowledge of what humans are capable of when cruelty is normalized and dressed in pageantry. We look at it now and say, what a marvel of engineering. But once they looked at it and said, what a marvel of control. That's what the Colosseum is now, a mirror reflecting whatever we want to see. To some, it is an achievement of architecture, of ingenuity beyond its time. To others, it is a symbol of empire, ambition carved in stone, glorious and terrifying. To the Catholic Church, it became a site of martyrdom, a place where the blood of saints joined the blood of slaves. A new narrative was overlaid atop the old, cleansing, rewriting, softening. To revolutionaries and modern politicians, it is a place of assembly, of lighting candles for peace or projecting colors for solidarity, a backdrop for statements too large for words. To artists, it is romantic. To historians, sobering. To Rome, indispensable. But to time, it is simply patient. The Colosseum has learned to outlive its meanings. Every era comes with a new story. Every century peels one more layer off, until what's left is not an identity, but an invitation to remember, to reflect, to question. We like to pretend we are nothing like the Romans, that we would never cheer for blood, never normalize cruelty for entertainment, never build monuments atop suffering. And yet, haven't we? Our spectacles are digital, our weapons are viral, our gladiators sign endorsement deals, but the structure remains, bread and circus, distraction and dominance, cruelty hidden behind a cheering crowd. The Colosseum survives not because it was the peak of Rome's brilliance, but because it was the truth of Rome's soul. It does not glorify the past, it interrogates it. Every arch asks a question. How far would you go to control a crowd? What would you give up for applause? What would you build to be remembered? And still, the tourists come. They walk the same halls emperors once paced. They lean on the railings where gladiators once scanned the sky. They take photos and laugh and leave, unaware that the building they just walked through was not a ruin. It was a survivor. It was a machine for meaning. A place that taught humans how to watch pain and call it theater. A place that still teaches us, if we're willing to listen. Because the Colosseum isn't over. It's not dead. It doesn't need an ending. It is the ending. And it will outlast us all. The Colosseum is no longer just in Rome. It's in our cities, in our screens, in our DNA. Not the architecture, but the idea, the design of control, the choreography of attention, the promise of wonder built on the bones of spectacle. We are no longer just inheritors of its ruins. We are its replicators. You can see it in every modern stadium. The tiers, the tunnel entrances, the floodlights, the roar. But that's just the surface. The real legacy runs deeper. It lives in our obsession with performative suffering. Reality television, combat sports, public humiliation turned entertainment, internet trials staged on platforms with millions watching. We don't throw bodies to lions anymore. We throw them to the algorithm. A viral mistake, a ruined reputation, a meme of someone's worst day, and the crowd roars, clicks, shares. We've made colosseums of our timelines. The Colosseum was never just about bricks and arches. It was about engineering emotion, shock, awe, fury, grief, triumph. Rome learned to manipulate these like gears in a machine. It built space in which human feeling could be guided, amplified, and monetized. Not with money, but with loyalty. The audience was not just watching, it was being shaped. That legacy continues. Modern politics, media, marketing, they all follow the Colosseum's blueprint. Hold their attention. Give them a villain, give them a hero. Make it feel like justice, even if it's cruelty. Make it feel like truth, even if it's theater. Give them a story too big to look away from. And above all, don't let them leave unsatisfied. Perhaps the most haunting part is this. The Colosseum didn't endure because Rome forced it on the world. It endured because we wanted it to. We wanted the grandeur, the symmetry, the myth. We wanted the chance to cheer from the stands and feel, if only for a moment, like we belonged to something bigger. We still want that. It's why we still gather in massive arenas for concerts, for fights, for rituals. It's why we still consume stories of war and glory, sacrifice and blood. The Colosseum whispers to something ancient in us, something that thrills at danger, but from a safe distance, something that grieves in chorus, something that forgets and forgives. Because if we truly saw the Colosseum for what it was, a monument to pain, a theater of manipulation, we might have left it behind. But instead, we rebuilt it again and again. Bigger, louder, brighter, not in stone, but in code, in steel, in spectacle. The Colosseum remains not because of what it was, but because of what it predicted. A world where architecture is ideology, where audience is power, where pain, when framed well enough, becomes entertainment, where the masses are fed a myth and hunger for more. It's easy to romanticize ruins, to stand beneath the arches and feel small, to imagine a time when men became gods, or were sacrificed for them. But the truth is simpler, sharper. The Colosseum isn't just a ruin, it's a reminder that even the most enduring empires were built on sand and blood. That spectacle is not salvation, that history is not progress. and that we are always, always building another arena.